So this is really a collaboration between 4 staff here that I want to talk to you about. And it's a particular module that was a 10-credit module, supposed to be a residential field course. And of course, when the pandemic hit, we had to very quickly think on our feet as to what to do. So what we came up with was actually put together in a lot of time pressure and with quite a bit of stress. So I think if we were to, revise this now over the years, which is what we are doing, we may be looking at continually evolving this module. But as Fraser said, geography is also a field subject, really. So what we do in geography with the students in many different guises and from the whole width of the subject is to take them out and to make them aware of the meaning of place, the environment, and how particular phenomena vary across space. And that's really what the key sort of learning objective of any field trip in geography is. Of course, there's a lot of different themes, and geography is really wide ranging. So the challenge we had was, how can we get students to experience this firsthand out in the field during a pandemic? And that's both the kind of human side of geography and the physical side of geography. So we came up with 4 day-long projects, and in the end, now into the post-pandemic time, this is actually merging into a kind of module that has an in-person version in semester 1. So we found that the benefit of having an in-person and an online option allowed students who are away on Erasmus exchange to still enroll and do learn some of the skills that they need to have if they wanted to do capstone projects in geography when they returned. So that was one of our other key objectives with this. And so we now have an online version that runs across either semester 1 or semester 2, depending on when the students are on their Erasmus exchange. Then it's those students who can't attend our in-person version, which we're now sort of bringing on again in the after times, the after pandemic times. And then the marks are submitted in semester 2. So the structure of the module is a general welcome and introduction in the semester 1 with a Q&A session. That was all online still last year. It'll probably move then onto a combination of online and in person. And then we have these 4 themed day trips and I'll focus here just on the ones that we ran purely online during the pandemic. And since then we have added other components here, and I think John Connolly's on this session as well, who's kindly stepped in and put together an in-person trip when that is possible for the students who are taking this module in semester 1 in the in-person version. So it's all a bit complicated, but it allows for more students to take this who are on Erasmus programs in semester 1. And the idea here is that they go by themselves and conduct fieldwork in half to full day exercises in and around Dublin, or in fact, during the first time we ran this in March 2020 or April 2020, when we were in the pandemic, where they were doing this along where they were living within their 5K radius. We gave them an online instruction on how to do the fieldwork for these individual days. And it covered both human and physical geography days. So we had the 4 projects, and one of them was very physical. One of them was a sort of crossover project, and the other 2 were human geography projects. We gave them an introductory session on each of the days in the morning online with the respective staff, and then they were given instructions as to what to do during the day by themselves independently within their 5K radius. And then they had readings that they were given as well on particular field topics and tasks. And of course, and you asked us, I think, to talk about some of the challenges. A real challenge here, particularly for me as head of department, was the worry that something was going to happen to the students if they went out by themselves, measuring things, or crossing the road, trying to do observations as part of their projects. So the risk assessments became a really important component of this, and the safety of the students. And actually it meant that I think the students became more aware of these issues than they would have otherwise been if we had run a sort of, staff-led field trip. So all in all, I think they became a little bit more aware of needing to ask themselves questions like, is it safe? Is it ethical what I'm doing here? I'm walking around, somebody's garden and digging up a bit of soil to analyze. What does it mean to work ethically in research? And also, is it appropriate what I'm doing? What actually is my research question? What's the meaning of precision versus accuracy in what I'm doing? I'm out here. I have to make decisions as to how I sample a bit of soil or how I take down particular notes. And they had videos on Blackboard, and they were encouraged to work in groups where they could, either by being online or exchanging their details and working with one another remotely. So that all in all, they were learning key geographical research skills. They were learning to take individual responsibility for what they were learning. They were encouraged to participate actively, and I think they probably did, or some of them at least, certain types. And this is interesting what Fraser was just saying about the students on the Lens reports who really grabbed an opportunity with the videos. I think we probably saw students who might have otherwise not participated as much, participate a bit more because they could do this independently. They learned to be confident in conducting fieldwork, which for us was a main objective, to get them to do that so that when they take on capstone projects, as this is a third-year module, that they can do that confidently. They learn to frame, develop, and conduct research and be critical and respectful when conducting the research as well. And of course, we had also a lot of emphasis on what it means to collaborate with other people when you do research and to be mindful of plagiarism. And so these 4 days are these individual elements, and I'll just give you a quick run through the soils day. Now, on the soils day, they got an introductory lecture that was online that they were listening to, and it basically outlined the 5 different factors that form soil and the meaning of soil in terms of ecosystem services provision and so on. So a theoretical background to it. And then they were instructed, and I'm making this all very short here, but they were instructed basically to find contrasting sites within their 5-kilometer radius, to go out and sample soil using specific methodologies. And some of them went into their urban back garden and looked for different microhabitats within their gardens to analyze the soils, as this student did. These are images taken from the students' reports that were submitted. Others went into more rural settings and sampled soils in forested areas or in agricultural areas as well. And what the students then did is they were encouraged to enter the latitude and longitude of all of their sample locations on a shared Google spreadsheet. And then there is a facility in Google, it's called My Maps, where the spreadsheet is directly converted into a map with the locations of all of the samples that were taken. So these are all the locations that the students in the lockdown had accessible to them in their 5K radius. And at each of those locations, they analyzed the soils that they sampled. They used visual techniques for describing the soil, and they used vinegar, for example, to look at calcium carbonate contents in a qualitative sense within the soil. So these are really kitchen tabletop methods for analyzing soils, and they had to have a hot press to dry the soil for a while. And then the data was entered into an online spreadsheet. I've blocked out the emails and their names here on the left, but this is the spreadsheet that they then put their soil sample reference and all the details into. They had access to a number of different apps on their phones, for example, to determine soil color, but also to determine slope angles. And there's numerous applications now available that they can download onto smartphones. And then they described the soil by way of its structure and so on, and whether there's any soil fauna or mineral deposits present. And they had very clear instructions as to how to do that. And then in this My Maps application on Google, it allows you to then click on any of these locations, and it comes up with the attributes for you to look at. So they were then instructed to either describe just their individual soil sampling and results, or to draw on the whole of the data set and frame a project with a research question and the presentation of the results, and some examples shown here, and then the interpretation and an analysis. And so a little mini project, mini capstone project in effect, but it was only a 1,500 word long report. Now, listening to Fraser, I think, it'd be great maybe if in future we can also give them the option to present something or submit something that's a video record rather than a written record. But we particularly wanted them to also explore sort of data presentation skills that might be useful then for their capstone project. So that was one of our particular aims here. So yeah, that's the end of this. And then I think we have some videos for the next one, don't we, Katrina?
That's correct. So I'll go into share here now, and we are of course on, let me see if I stop sharing, that's the wrong screen. Get out of that, okay, sorry. I need to share the videos with you, which are on my desktop. And now that's probably the wrong one, is it? It's the other one you wanted first, this one. So this is Cian's recording, I think. Can you see that? Is that coming up?
Hi, so I'm Cian Callahan, and this is a section of our residential field module which we ran in geography in 2020 in a virtual form within Student Zone 5K. This day looked at land use, change, planning and development within Student Zone 5K. So this will be an image familiar to most people, the app designating what we could get to within our 5K during COVID restrictions. And we use this as a lens really here to get students to interact with their own environments and apply geographical skills to them. So what this does is it really kind of provides a novel lens to think about the urban environment in particular, because we're all kind of out on these circuitous walks throughout that period of time, and students get very familiar with their own environment and can really see kind of both developmental changes happening within them, but also kind of what's there in terms of resources and what's not there, and get a critical eye on that. So capitalizing on this then, it asks students to think a little bit about the urban changes that were taking place within their own 5K, and to try to apply skills from urban geography and from urban fieldwork as a way to interrogate those things. So this is some pictures from my own 5K at the time. We can see development sites in stalled form, and really get a sense of the kinds of changes and transformations that are happening to an area over that period of time, coupled with what's there and what's not there, because we can't really get out of that 5K. Along with this, we have a situation in cities and in urban environments more generally, where cities and urban environments are influenced by a whole range of factors and actors that are well beyond the scope of even the city boundaries itself, never mind the 5K. So in this sense, we, in this section of the field course, ask students to think a little bit about the ways in which their urban environments were both reflective of the communities that live within them and their own experiences, but also maybe influenced by actors and processes and finance and other kinds of activities that extend well beyond that area. So the set of methods we try to use then try to bring those two things together. So on the day itself, students were asked to kind of consider the following. So this section aims to, look at the aims and ambitions of development projects, to see what's called the relational character of urbanization, how it's conceived in relation to elsewhere, whether that's, whether a particular development might have an influence of finance or other kinds of actors coming from outside of the state, or whether, for example, in a commuter area outside Dublin, there's, a housing estate being built which is conceived in relation to people commuting in and out of Dublin for work, for example. Students are asked to think about the urban governance arrangements involved, so who has a stake in deciding what urban development takes place and in what ways, and then think a little bit about the power relations involved, so whose voice is heard and whose is excluded in these kinds of conversations. And so with this then, we've got two methods that students were asked to use. So in the first instance, they're asked to kind of prior to going on the field day itself, engage in a process of policy analysis and stakeholder identification. So mapping out kind of who are the set of stakeholders involved in a single development site, which they would pick prior to going out in the field day itself. Do some research via planning documents, via media research, think a little bit about kind of what are the development priorities, who are the different sets of actors, and maybe what are their different points of view on whether a particular development is should go ahead or it shouldn't, for example. And then secondly, they're asked to think a little bit about true skills of observation, field note reflection and interpretation. So using a set of ethnographic field note approaches that go out on the field day themselves, take photographs, take detailed notes of what's there, and then use that as a basis to both evaluate the set of stakeholders and the kinds of contestations that are happening within a particular development, but also their own reflections on what that particular development might add or not to their own community and their own 5K designation.
So that was Cian O'Callaghan. Thanks very much, Cian. That was also very interesting. I think, Mark, you were due to go ahead next if you want to fire ahead.
Thank you. So my day was looking at reading and recording the urban landscape. And the idea there was to get them to look at how urban landscapes develop over time and how to record that information about these urban landscapes in the field. So we looked at an area just to the east of College in the Trinity ward, and I developed that because it could be used very easily then as an actual in-person field course as well as an online one. So what we concentrated on was public housing. So rather than looking at the entire landscape, we took out a strand of the landscape and tried to look at the changing impact of public housing developments on the urban landscape. And in the course of the field trip, what we looked at was how power relations changed over time, the different actors involved, the different forces involved in shaping the urban landscape, and what the outcomes were of that. So we looked at developments from around 1900 in the 1920s on through the 1930s, with the great developments of the 1930s, and then right up to the 60s and the 70s, really stopping about in the 1980s. So the idea was to get them into an introduction to how to observe and how to record the urban landscape, and then to move towards analysis of that. Now, obviously, we couldn't go out into the field, so I decided to do this simply using Google Maps Street View. It's a very straightforward approach. So you can go into Google Maps and you use the Street View, and you're able to walk around the landscape with all the students on Blackboard able to follow along. And very importantly, I didn't jump from site to site as I was doing this. I actually moved the cursor through the landscape as if they were on a field trip actually out in the field, so that they got the experience of observing the entire landscape and not just the particular sites that we isolated. But because it was virtual, we also then have the possibility of something that Fraser was talking about. So in Google Maps Street View, there is a little time machine. So in this case, this is Moss Street in the most recent Google Maps Street View image. But we can go back to 2009 and we can see the same street, and you're able to do this. You couldn't do this in the field so easily. And in fact, what we see here is a very important example of very early Dublin Corporation tenement building construction from about 1913 in Moss Street, which was not protected for some reason or other, did not have heritage protection, and was subsequently demolished and is now replaced. If you go into the field today, that is now replaced by a huge modern building on that site. So Google Maps Street View then provided a very simple method of actually conducting a field trip virtually. But because it's virtual as well, you can draw in other resources. So for example, as we were going through the Google Maps Street View, then I was able then to take the students in to other resources such as heritagemaps.ie, which is a map-based database which enables you to go in. And very importantly, heritagemaps.ie includes different base maps. So you can go right back to the mid-19th century and look at the first edition Ordnance Survey. You can look at the 1900 Ordnance Survey. you can look at the 1930s Ordnance Survey, and you can use contemporary aerial photographs. So in the course of trekking around the landscape virtually, you can also then draw in this other sort of information. And heritagemaps.ie then also includes databases, such as, for example, on these blue dots here, the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. And you can go into those little blue dots, pull up some basic information, and then link through to the National Inventory for Architectural Heritage and get some very good detailed information on the buildings that we were looking at. And the students then could return to this in due course as they were preparing their reports. So what I did then was try to replicate an actual field trip experience in a completely virtual environment, but then was able to take advantage of things you could do in the virtual environment, such as linking with other databases, or such as using the time machine in Street View to enhance the field trip experience. And then the students, the assessment was also digital. So they used a very simple platform called Story Maps, and by the Night Lab. And this is a free, easily accessible platform where you can construct a spatial narrative, where you can pin slides onto a map and demonstrate a spatial narrative. And this is one of the students' story maps, and they go through the different buildings. So they show them, they were able to take screen grabs from the Google Maps Street View. In this case, they were also then able to put in their own drawings, which they made as they were looking at the images on the Street View. And then they were also able to draw on the historic map information in heritagemaps.ie to show the development of that particular landscape over time. So what I found was that it was perfectly possible then to conduct a field trip completely virtually and give the students some experience of actually doing a field trip. And of course, then with safety requirements taken into account, the students were able to go back on their own into this landscape and maybe take photographs or look at the landscape themselves. Some of the longer term learning for this, for me, in terms of things I would do differently as a result of this, I have subsequently included little mini field trips within lectures in modules, which is very easy to do in class now. And I've found that it's really good in my historical geography module or my Trinity elective on Irish landscapes, that you can actually go and conduct a little field trip within a lecture. And I found that a real enhancement to my teaching. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mark. That's absolutely fascinating and really great to see how you can bring things forward into future practice and other modules you're doing. So finally, we have Anna Davies's presentation on mission greenhouses. So I'm just going to play this video.
COVID social distancing over the past 2 years dramatically highlighted just how important our immediate surroundings are to our health and well-being. It also revealed the massive disparities in access to public green spaces and green infrastructure for people, particularly in urban areas. In the Green Hoods Field Day, we gave students the opportunity to connect with their microgeographies, the world immediately around them, and critically explore their experiences within their 5-kilometre world. Drawing on the landmark work of Mike Lynch's image of the city, mapping edges and landmarks, pathways and nodes, students were asked to create a mental map of their 5-kilometre worlds without consulting any formal maps and noting any green spaces or green infrastructure, highlighting 3 of them that were important to them within that. They were asked to compare these with a cartographical map of the area to explore any differences between the 2. Then students were asked to map green spaces and green infrastructure on the cartographic map and plot a 5-kilometre transect walk through their map through one of their key green spaces. Walking along this route, they were asked to take notes, photos, sketches, creating a transect walk map. Finally, they were asked to survey their selected green space, describing positive and negative features and devising a plan for the green area to enhance its quality and accessibility. thinking about what will be required to make those improvements and what barriers might inhibit their implementation. Many students are attracted to geography because of the amazing environments in far-off places around the globe, from the Amazon rainforest to the Great Barrier Reef. The COVID constraints allowed us to emphasise the importance of microgeographies, our everyday home landscapes.
That was also very interesting, and thanks, Anna. Iris, do you want to round up and tell us what you'll bring forward, or?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think overall in the as these kind of individual presentations showed, we've all, I think, experienced exposure to particular methods for conveying information to students that we hadn't previously thought of. So for me in the soils practical, that was really the smartphone apps and the sort of lower key sampling and analysis methods that I think, you know, I've never really thought that we should really bring that in, and particularly if we have really large classes as well, where it's difficult to bring students into the lab, you know, to get them to do some of this independently and in you know, even in their home environment is so much makes it so much more flexible for us to teach them these kinds of methods. And then we've seen this with Mark's and Cian's presentation, and also with Anna's there, that this bringing in a sort of digital method for analyzing and viewing and processing data is also something that I think all of us are bringing into the face-to-face teaching now. I also think that's really interesting, and this is the link with Fraser there is on this, the diversity of students and their needs in this teaching, and that we really should think about what is it about these new methods that we are now developing that suits particular students, to make sure that we have a wider reach to a more diverse set of students who maybe find otherwise less accessible this information. I do think there are always challenges. There are always the flip sides of the coin. You know, there's obviously if we make the assessment diverse, then the criteria for marking and so on have to be, you know, we have to look at those really carefully and make sure that they are equitable across the board and so on. So it is something, I think it's an evolving thing. And I think the one thing that does come out of it for me is that these sort of events are great, and we need to keep talking about our experiences in order to never really stand still and, you know, think about the next thing.
Yeah, that's great, Iris. Really agree with you there about thinking about the diversity of students, and the fact, you know, the things that technology has shown us over the last couple of years in many different arenas of how it can make it more accessible for some students. And yes, the issue around getting the criteria and the rubrics is also, you know, it's also one to explore.